There's a lot of nutrient-dense, very nourishing food that comes in canned form that is minimally processed, by the way. I like to celebrate that. Not all canned food is heavily processed. Sometimes, even as a dietitian, I kind of fall into that health halo. Everything has to be fresh. But there are lots of options that retain a lot of those nutrients and offer a lot of practical approaches to feeding ourselves.
Welcome to Culinary Medicine Recipe. I'm so happy you're here. I'm your host, Dr. Sabrina Falke. I was a primary care doctor for 16 years and went to school for 4 years to specialize in culinary medicine. In this work, I get to combine my passion and expertise in both medicine and food to teach people about food as medicine and to empower them to understand what ingredients optimize health and also how to cook those ingredients to make delicious meals. On this show, I interview top chefs, doctors, healthcare visionaries, and food service professionals who are making great strides in the field of culinary medicine. Join me as we continue to explore the amazing world of culinary medicine, where I will empower you to make changes to your health and wellness with great food right away. Welcome to today's show. I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's episode, Pacific Coast Producers. I'm so excited for today's guest, Milette Siler, who's an RD. I have known her for about 7 years, and she has done incredible work advancing the food as medicine movement in a variety of ways. She's done over a decade of work in the culinary medicine space, including enhancing nutrition education for medical students, residents, and health professionals. She's also started a culinary medicine clinical service line with a physician in this work. And she's transformed community kitchens into clinical spaces where patients can utilize insurance for culinary medicine shared medical appointments. Milette, I'm so excited that we're here having this conversation. I welcome your wisdom, and I really am looking forward to getting into it. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm very excited to join you on a very stormy North Texas morning. So if you hear a little bit of thunder or a little bit of rumble, it's not me getting ready for lunch. It's the weather.
I love it. Coming from San Diego, we don't often have weather. So my neighbor next to me and I actually will text each other like, did you see there's weather outside?
It's a balmy 80 degrees. Oh, wait, a gust.
Oh,
Nice.
that would be too hot. We like it mid-70s.
Oh, okay. See, I'm learning things too. You know, I've had the best guacamole of my life in San Diego. Most beautiful avocado I've ever seen. And I'm a connoisseur, so.
Oh, that sounds delicious. All right. With already our mouth salivating, let's get started. So you and I have known each other 7-ish years, and it has been amazing to see your career shifting and the work that you're doing at UT Southwestern just growing in so many different aspects. And it has been amazing to watch. And part of it has been you continuing to find your voice to reach different demographics. So with that in mind, why does food as medicine matter?
Sure.
Like, why are we having this conversation?
Yeah, let's talk about it because I had someone ask me, food as medicine is really having a moment. And I kind of looked at them askance and said, food as medicine has been around as a topic for thousands of years, right? We're just now getting around to really talking about it in the United States and how does it fit within a framework. It's not a fringe topic anymore. I think it's important when we're talking about food as medicine or food is medicine, kind of those two terms are similar, but they kind of get bandied around to really define it. Acknowledge that for some folks it's controversial because anytime we're talking about food can be the poison, but it's also the remedy, right? Food is medicine is an approach where we're incorporating food and food-focused education directly in your healthcare, right? Whether preventing disease or we're managing symptoms or we are treating disease with food. It's controversial. I work in oncology. That's been part of my background. I started doing this work in the teaching kitchen alongside an outpatient oncology practice. And I determined really early on, before it got really hip and popular, hey, this is never designed to replace traditional medical nutrition therapy, but it's a really useful tool in my toolkit. So why does food as medicine matter? As a clinician, I was determining early on that my job as a dietitian was to give advice and to talk about behavior change and to offer tools, offer educational handouts, and tell folks what they needed to do as far as lifestyle and behavior change to help them through their cancer journey. And, I felt like we were making a lot of progress getting folks to see, why is this important? How does it directly impact my health? But where we continually struggled as clinicians, myself included, is how? How do I implement that? So much of the work I did as a dietitian was talking about macronutrients, talking about dietary fiber, we're talking about grams, we're talking about milligrams. We might be giving a picture, but there were folks who just weren't connecting the dots. So when we switch and we're able to bring them into a teaching kitchen and tie in that clinical context with the food, with the how, putting food in people's hands, putting carrots in people's hands, and showing them how to make whole grains taste delicious, it really overcame a lot of those barriers. My dear friend and physician partner, Dr. Jacqueline Albin, who has been really integral into shaping my personal approach to food as medicine, says it best. And she says, just like everything else in our country, nothing seems to be easy. People want it's this or it's that. It's pharmacotherapy and traditional medicine or food as medicine, and they don't really align. And that's just not the approach that I think works best for most people. We want both options, a whole myriad and spectrum of options integrated as tools in toolkits for clinicians, and they have their evidence-based hat on, and they can say, a blend of all these things work. Yes, we might want you to continue your statins, but we're also going to take a look at how can we build flavor, reduce reliance on sodium, and get more potassium in your diet by following a Mediterranean diet pattern. That could help you as well, and potentially we could move off some of that statin medicine, but right now we're using both as an approach.
I love that you're emphasizing that it's not one or the other, because often when we're talking about food as medicine, people assume that we're in this space against medications, like you mentioned statins, so cholesterol lowering medications, or especially working with oncology. So if someone has cancer, it's not saying, well, chemo or a carrot. It's looking at what are the tools that can be used. So in the teaching kitchen, when you're empowering people, how does that conversation go as far as if you want people to eat more produce, for example? We'll stay on that side. How does that play out of how to empower people after they take your class to have this continue in their own households?
Oh, that's such a great question. How do we implement that? And that, again, is going to be individualized, but we find that whether you are a participant at a food pantry, like that's where you're getting the majority of your food, or if you have plenty of resources and you could go to any grocery store if you're going to specialty food stores, there are opportunities to make it more simple, to make it more functional. I work with, for example, folks who have cancer, and, they might not have access issues, but they might have time issues. They're going to treatments or their energy levels are suffering. So anything that I can do to make the nourishing option the most accessible option for you is going to work. So part of my method as a culinary dietitian is showing people how to meal plan, showing people how to identify some recipes, things that are nourishing, things that are delicious, things that they and their loved ones appreciate. One of the greatest tools we have is the ability to have 3 or 5 simple meals that we can make, whether that's middle of the week, we're tired, we're lazy, we don't want to put our mental energy into figuring out food, and it's just a couple of steps away. It's in our freezer, it's in our pantry. These are things that are shelf stable or frozen, and you can pull them out and you can rely on them and pair them with other fresh products. Maybe we've got like a lovely, some fresh cilantro or some mint, and then we've got some canned beans and canned tomatoes, and we can pull that out and make a quick salsa that's a blend. As we mentioned before, it doesn't have to be all this or all that. It's just another tool. There's a lot of nutrient-dense, very nourishing food that comes in canned form that is minimally processed. By the way, I like to celebrate that. Not all canned food is heavily processed. Sometimes, even as a dietitian, I kind of fall into that health halo. Everything has to be fresh. But there are lots of options that retain a lot of those nutrients and offer a lot of practical approaches to feeding ourselves.
feel like I have to emphasize that I, even personally in my own household doing this work, I sometimes will feel guilty. It's like, oh, I'm using something that's minimally processed that's in my cupboard. And then to remember my own teachings of
Right.
that this is, yes, we're all busy. It doesn't mean because we do this work that all of a sudden we have, an extra hour in the day to chop from scratch or cook beans from scratch. And so often, and I'm guessing this comes up for you too. So if we do give the flexibility and the liberty of having someone really understand that having things in your pantry or in the freezer are beyond not just okay, but truly reach for them and make it more accessible. Often the question comes up about nutrition, the nutritional value. What happens when you minimally process food versus having something fresh, either from a garden or bought at a farmer's market or the grocery store? So what are the differences in nutritional aspects with the different types of processing?
That's a great question, and it comes up a lot with my patients, right? And, I struggle with that myself. First off, when you think about fresh, I am a big supporter of local farmers markets, growing food ourselves. But we know when you look at the data, especially in North Texas, where I'm at, what we can grow in a garden is, it's kind of like the garnish on the plate, right? It's not providing most of the nourishing calories that we need to really sustain good health. So fresh at most grocery stores is a subjective term. I don't want to disparage the beautiful food that you see there because it can and often is very healthy. But, you know, sometimes you think, hey, look at that. Look at the journey of most tomatoes to the grocery store, for example. They're picked oftentimes when they're green, and then they can ripen on the counter as they travel to the grocery store. But days, weeks, in the case of some food on our shelves, sometimes months or even up to a year before it's actually put on a counter up for purchase at the grocery store as a fresh option, right? Whereas we contrast that with most frozen food or most canned food, the factories where, peaches are canned, for example, it's 5 miles, 10 miles down the road from the peach tree farm. And they wait until that peach is perfectly ripe and it's had an opportunity to really optimize those micronutrients. And then it's brought a few miles down the road to the factory. And with very minimal processing, maybe just a little bit of heat. I grew up actually in a farm and we canned peaches. That's how we got through the winter time. I lived in rural Idaho. Canning peaches was just part of it. And I know really mostly it's steam with very few, if any, additives at all added to that process. There is sometimes with frozen food an impact to vitamin C. Vitamin C is used as an antioxidant by the body, and it can be fragile. So there's some data that with some foods, it depends on the food group, that your vitamin C content in frozen can sometimes drop between about 40 to 60%. But there is actually some data that suggests that some of this micronutrient content actually, it's more readily preserved when we're canning. So when we are looking at opportunities to nourish ourselves in a practical way, when you think about food waste, for example, I know that that's a new topic to throw in here. Food isn't nutrition until we consume it. And currently in America, we throw away about 40% of our food that we purchase, mostly fruits and vegetables. Nobody's getting nourished, right? So when we have frozen food or canned food, it gives us a wide margin of error. We're much more likely to consume that product before it goes bad. So for me as a culinary dietitian, I really try to help my patients contextualize, like, oh, is there a small drop in nutrients here? What about that? I said, in a lab, that might be yes or no, but I want you to think about the practical approach of what this looks like for you in your kitchen at home. And we've all been there where we pull a bag of, like zucchini out of the back of the fridge and you're like, uh-oh, uh-oh, nobody's getting any nourishment from this. And those micronutrients are history. So I say the practical approach is if you have a way to purchase food that is going to be nourishing, in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 months from now, that's the reality of nourishing our bodies in today's world.
That is such gem of information. There's a couple things I want to touch on. Number one, as soon as you said the zucchini in the back of the drawer, I'm picturing zucchini or cucumbers where your finger goes
Oh,
right
I
through
know.
it.
I
So,
do adore them. And I have a lot of fresh food in my fridge right now, and I love the combination of, hey, I go to the grocery store, I come home with things. I buy that cucumber. I'm gonna wanna eat that in the next few days. Oh, but guess what? I also bought some canned beans and some canned tomatoes. So I have a little bit more margin of error with those products, right? And then I can combine and make those things work. But yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, as a culinary dietitian, I often am not there in time to resuscitate some sad cilantro. Although I do have a tip for that. I know that is not specifically what we're here to talk about. But I always say get your fresh herbs out of the plastic bags. They sell those in at the grocery store if that's where you're getting your herbs. If you put them in a glass of water, treat them like fresh flowers, snip off the ends, and then they look fancy in your fridge. It'll last for 4 times longer. So I'm all about preserving your food. We want to eat it, and it looks really pretty, and you feel super fancy.
that sounds like you're ready for social media posting with that visual.
I know, right? Like, I'm just gonna put my cilantro out and take my picture. Boom.
Yes.
I know. I'm
But that's
all about looking fancy.
that's good. One of the parts I love, and not only what you said, like it's not nutrient until it goes in our body, but also the sense of how it's cooked. So you mentioned, like, for example, if the vitamin C is sensitive, fragile. And yet when we can tomatoes or when we cook tomatoes, then the lycopene rises. So the sense of knowing the difference of the micronutrients and not having to memorize it, just loosening up and say, I'm going to get different nutrients, different
Yeah.
packages of micronutrients in different forms. Okay, so tomatoes, canned tomatoes, I feel like those we often can use with confidence. We feel confident saying it. Let's go to canned fruit because I know there's a conversation. A couple things. Number one, like you mentioned the peaches and how quickly they go from essentially the farm, like truly ripe on the tree, and they're in the cans, which is fabulous. My understanding is they're peeled. So what happens to the fiber content there? I've been asked that. And number two, what about the juice or syrup that's used, and why do we have to use juice or syrup in canned fruits?
This is fascinating science. I am at my heart a food science girly. So I do always have to say I love the point that you made earlier about when we're looking at a wide variety of plant foods, we might choose a format, like maybe one day I'm eating white rice. Is it necessarily the most nutritious option? Maybe, maybe or not. But I'm going to eat that with a wide variety of other foods, and that can be a delivery point. So it is true when we remove the skin from fruits and vegetables, and especially during the canning process with peaches, we are reducing a small amount of fiber. It's true. But the canning process itself, fiber is a durable substance. It's not going to go away when it's canned. It's still going to retain that. So yes, you do lose a small amount of fiber there. I always think about what am I eating those peaches with? Of course, you could open up a can of peaches and enjoy them by themselves, or you could make them into one of my favorite things to do is make a really nourishing dessert that's very, very lightly sweet with canned peaches with a cobbler topping of, whole grains and oats, and adds a lot of dietary fiber along with that. You could cut up those peaches and put them into an oatmeal for breakfast with the light sweetness of the peach or the fruit along with that. So it's an opportunity to add a little bit of naturally occurring sweetness along with more fiber-rich foods. And if you're following that dietary pattern all day long, you're going to be much more likely to beat that fiber recommendation, which unfortunately less than half of us do right now.
And as far as how canned fruits are canned, so sometimes you see either heavy syrup or light syrup or in juice. Why not do water?
This is fascinating. So I have to be really transparent and say that I was always trained as a dietitian. You want that fruit in water, not in syrup or juice, right? Which makes sense on paper until you look at the actual science of what happens when you put a piece of fruit into water, right? We have two different, it creates almost like a vacuum where we're pulling out the sweetness that's naturally occurring in the fruit, and it goes out into the water, essentially creating a syrup. But that leaves your fruit, not only does it not taste as good, but it also kind of damages the structural integrity. It just tastes off. So feedback from years and years and years of consumers saying this fruit doesn't taste very good at all really led us to take a closer look at what happens scientifically in that can. So what they do now that preserves that, so we have that equal density or intensity of nutrients on both sides, is they can it in its own juice. So that way everything is equal. We're not pulling any of the flavor, any of the nutrition, any of the density out of the fruit. So that way when you pull that out, you have that fruit just as it went in.
I feel like I have to end it with the word isotonic. I don't often get to use that in a
Oh,
sentence. So you're
yes,
creating an
thank you.
isotonic solution where you're creating that 13% sweetness on the fruit as well as
I
the
wasn't
juice.
going to go in there and with a renin-angiotensin analogy there, but maybe some of our more sciencey people. I think isotonic it
It
is
sounds
as
good.
impressive as it sounds. You want to hang out. I always say, you've got a party happening on it. You want equal fun happening on both sides of that cell wall. So yes, thank you for whipping that in there. It's an isotonic adjustment.
I wanted to touch base on what you said of creating this cobbler otherwise. So I'm going to say what I would do, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So in that scenario with the peaches, I would pull out the peaches from the syrup and not use the syrup. Yet the natural sweetness, again, this equilibrium of the sweetness that has occurred, now you're pulling that peach out, you're using it, and remembering that's the source of your sweetness. So you may not need to add any additional sugar. Just like we talk about when I do this work if I'm making a Caesar salad, a white bean Caesar salad, for example, and the saltiness may be coming from my capers, it may be coming from my cheese source, so I may not need to add additional salt. So in this scenario, that's how I would look at this. I'm making a fruit-forward dessert, and the peaches are bringing the sweetness to the party. And because they have the fiber, it essentially balances out the blood sugar going up. But you take it away, Milette, as a dietitian, of how you would answer, because people still get so concerned
Yes.
about the sweetness. I'm eating sugar. What's it going to do to my body short and long term? So how would you approach this?
Well, I love your approach. I feel like we hang out so much, Dr. Fauquier, that we might be simpatico in a number of respects. But again, I lean back into that philosophy that we hear of just as there are no superfoods, there is no one food that when we consume that food, that's going to solve all of our nutritional problems and make us beautiful and charming people. There's also, especially when we're talking about desserts or natural sweetness. So when we're talking about fruit, there is a differentiation between added sugar and naturally occurring sugar. So I think it's important to say, yes, when we are adding fruit juice into the can, is that added sugar? Does that meet the definition of yes, it does. But when we're pulling out, that is exactly what I do. I will drain the fruit when I open up a can of fruit and typically drain out that juice. Some folks might want to incorporate that, but then would you need to add an additional added sugar, to if you were creating a dessert? No, that could serve as its own, which also saves money, saves time, and could be a great choice. So yes, there is a small amount of added sugar in that juice, but when we're looking at increasing consumption of naturally occurring sugar, does the fruit that is used in canning, is that still a naturally occurring sugar source? Absolutely. Which has a lot of the other benefits that we touched on. Dietary fiber. We're incorporating dietary fiber. So when we talk about consuming sugar, for a lot of folks that are managing blood sugar, whether they have type 2 diabetes or they're concerned about other issues, when you consume sugar along with fiber, that has different impacts for our body. It's not going to spike our blood sugar. It's a slower increase in our blood glucose levels. And then it doesn't fall off as quickly, which creates those sugar lows, which gets us craving more simple carbohydrate. And we create that cycle of sadness, I call it. You have something with a lot of sugar in it, very little fiber, we crash, we want to reach for something quick to fix our problem, and then you get all of this up and down, which impacts our health and wellness. So, do I believe as a dietitian that canned fruit, when used appropriately, can be a part of a nourishing Mediterranean diet approach to health? Absolutely.
Mic drop on that. You have spoken. And it's that loosening up of ourselves. So if we have access to canned foods, and that is what we are able to have in our kitchen, to realize that, just like you just said, that is food that fits into the Mediterranean pattern of eating. And you've said it so eloquently. I so appreciate you talking about this isotonic or similar amount of sugar between the juice or light syrup that it's used and the actual fruit. And that amount of the light syrup or juice is about 13%. So if you are buying canned fruit, it's important to know what to look for. And what you want is either canned in its own juice or fruit juice or light syrup. And that, again, is going to be that equal amount that Milette just talked about. What you want to avoid, if at all possible, is the heavy syrup, because that does have a sugar content that is higher than the natural fruit. So that would give you more added sugars. If you have no option, then making sure with pulling out the fruit from the syrup that it was used for and trying to drain it of any excess sugar. Hopefully that's helpful for purchasing and feeling more comfortable with canned fruit. Since we're talking about canned foods, the can itself, what is the concern, or should there be a concern about the steel cans or BPA? Because that's another reluctance that people have about using canned goods.
I always like to emphasize that, when we're talking about canned fruit, when we're talking about canned beans, when we're talking about canned tomatoes, these staples that could help build our health in our pantry, most of those are BPA free. And it's very easy to flip that label over. It's going to be on the back of the label, very recognizable. So looking for that, if that's something that is of a particular concern, you can go in your pantry right now and ensure yourself, hey, this is BPA free. That's the standard of quality with canned food now. The steel can, to me, talking about sustainability, steel cans are highly recyclable. You rinse those, and that, I know I feel better as somebody who is concerned about the sustainability, not just of my own personal ecosystem, but our planet. I'm thinking about, this is something that contributes to a healthier planet and reduces food waste. Food packaging, just as there's a lot out there. So steel cans, it's a healthy way to preserve food that I support.
Now, going back into the culinary medicine brain. So if I make a smoothie with, say, canned cherries or the fruit salad or all these, how, as far as feeling satiated after the meal, if I've made that smoothie, does it change how long I feel full if I'm having those in a smoothie, if I'd used fresh or if I'd eaten the fresh fruit versus making a smoothie?
It's interesting. There was a systematic review done a few years ago, looking at a variety of studies that analyze the difference, the role of mastication or chewing. Mastication is just the fun, sciencey way to say we chew our food. So there's a lot of mechanisms that talk about, when you're actually actively chewing your food versus drinking your calories in the form of a smoothie. What is the role of satiety? Does that impact our gut microbiome? What signals are we sending to our brain? So during the processing of fruit in a can, it can make it a little bit softer, easier to consume. As we mentioned earlier, that doesn't impact the fiber though. The fiber is still there. Just cooked fruit is a little bit softer. It might be a little easier to digest. So if we're concerned about satiety, chewing your food offers a number of benefits. This study was really interesting. They looked at a lot of things, including, pizza, whether you chew a piece of pizza 40 times or 10 times, and then we evaluate what does that do to our hormone levels that regulate satiety, such as ghrelin or naturally occurring GLP-1. Looking for opportunities if you're drinking a smoothie, whether you're putting in fresh fruit or frozen fruit or canned fruit, is there opportunities to add additional dietary fiber? I like to mix in oats into my smoothies to add a little bit more dietary fiber. but just the fruit naturally occurring. We're not adding simply juice. We're adding the whole fruit in there is going to offer a lot of those benefits that aid satiety. But then I always think, you could always pair that as a dietitian. I say, what do we know promotes satiety? Protein, produce. So the dietary fiber that's going to be in produce, which is very prevalent and present in canned food, versus protein. So making sure that we're including a protein source in our smoothie. Sometimes that might look like, hey, maybe you want to blend some tofu in there. Maybe you want to add some Greek yogurt. When you have a nice blend, a great breakfast or a great lunch or a great dinner is going to be a blend of lean protein, quality carbohydrate, and maybe a little bit of healthy fat that's going to promote satiety and give you everything you need to feel nice and full, keep your energy levels till you get your next dose of nourishment.
2 last questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm here for it.
Okay. Number 1. If you wanted to leave our listeners with one takeaway or piece of advice to carry forward, what would it be?
Man, I know we're kind of going against my whole philosophy. There's no one message. But if I had to say one message, you're saying, what if we have somebody that's like, yes, Milette and Dr. Falquier have convinced me that I want to invest in my personal nourishment by having a healthy pantry that I can rely on. How do I get started with that? My one piece of advice would be to take the same approach that I do in clinic with anybody who wants to make change. Start small. Start small and think about yourself, who you are right now. What resources do you have? How much space do you have to allot to this? How much money do you have to allot to this? Trust me, there is a cottage industry out there of people who would love to take your money and tell you what to do. My advice is think about what you use to nourish your body now and how can you make that work in a pantry. And that could be like, you go to the store and maybe you buy an extra bag of the rice that you and your family like. Or, hey, look, canned tomatoes are on sale. Instead of just one can for pasta for tonight, I'm going to buy, they're on sale. I'm going to pick up 5 or 6 cans. Start small and make a plan using food that you know that you and your family like right now. And then you can always expand on that. And if you're not quite sure what works for you at home yet, you can make a list and do an inventory. What are some recipes of things that I like? Is there a way that canned food could make this more convenient and nourishing for me to make it more accessible? So that would be my one piece of advice. Think about yourself, make 1 or 2 small changes, and then build from there.
Now, for your last question.
Ooh.
What's one myth or misconception in your field you wish more people understood?
That is so deep. Okay, I'm going to tell you one that came up just recently. Dietitians were a little bit of a rarity in the world. There's some barriers to getting care with a dietitian, especially if you're wanting to utilize your insurance. It's changing, but it's still growing. So a lot of times when people know that I'm a dietitian, they think I'm the food police. And I'm going to tell you right now, me and every other dietitian I know, that's not really our role. Right? We're here to help you. We're here to be an asset for you to help you figure out how to make your nutrition goals work. So when I'm in the lunchroom with somebody and I'm looking at their plate of food, the initial advice is they cover their plate. They're like, oh no, the dietitian is going to judge me for my lunch. And I said, I guarantee if a dietitian is looking at your plate, they're probably wondering if it's good and if you would give them a bite if they asked. We're here to be your friend. We're here to help. We're here to help you meet your health and nutrition goals. We're not here to judge you. We want to make a change in the world so it's more accessible and affordable for everybody to have access to nourishing, delicious food.
I'm guessing you have had the experience as I have had at the grocery store where you run into somebody you know and they look at what you're purchasing.
Yes. Yes.
I feel sometimes with that because I get most of my produce from the farmer's market or a specific place. So when I am at a more routine grocery store, there isn't much produce in there. And I feel like I have to add up, yes, this is not my produce run.
I don't get it all here. Yeah.
Yes.
I actually, my son's birthday was a few weeks ago, and I had bought, he wanted a specific ice cream and all of the fixins for his favorite dinner. which, is not an everyday dinner, clearly. And yeah, I did have someone say, "Oh, someone's having a party." I'm like, "Yeah, it's a party, not every day. This is not every day." I'm like, "You know what? I need to I need to chill." We're just as influenced by that as well, what we should be as clinicians. I love Dr. Tim Hartland. He says, everyone needs help managing their relationship with food, whether you're an internist or a truck driver or a dietitian. We can always look for opportunities to improve. So I view those as an opportunity for me to be humble and recognize that, I don't have to be perfect.
And also I encourage the ice cream moments, the celebrations. That's what they're about, is celebration, and to not feel any sense of shame or otherwise. Is there anything you haven't said as we've had this incredible conversation that you want our listeners to know?
You can do it. Sometimes we look at where we are now and where we want to be, or where we assume our healthcare provider wants us to be, and it feels like an ivory tower, out of touch. That's just not attainable. And the truth is that what keeps us from health, especially in this country, it's not the nodding moments of like, "Oh, I'm eating this and I'm bad. I'm eating that and I shouldn't." It's what we don't eat that gets us into trouble far more than anything else. So looking for opportunities to be more inclusive with ourselves, to, yes, as you mentioned, celebrate the treats, but then where can I find more nutrient dense, calorie bang for my buck, as I like to call it, where I can get more of the things that matter: more fruits, more vegetables, more nuts and seeds, more whole grains. Are there any opportunities for me to pivot just a little bit to allow more of this nourishment to enrich my life? I want people to understand that you're not as far off as you think. A better you, a more healthy, nourished, mindful you is within your grasp.
How can people reach you?
Oh, okay. So I'm getting better at the socials. I'm getting better at the social media. Probably the most accessible way to reach me and where I reach others is on LinkedIn. As far as I know, I'm the only Milette Siler out there. So finding me on LinkedIn, I do have a Instagram account that is woefully neglected, RD Foodie Milette. That's where you can find me on an Instagram. But LinkedIn is probably the best way to do that. And I have several publications as well.
Thank you. And as I want to thank you so much. And one of the things that didn't come out in the conversation, but I do want to emphasize, is the work that you and Dr. Albin have done of moving clinical culinary medicine forward in a way that is first in the country, of utilizing people's insurance to do shared medical appointments, consultation service. And I mean, I know that's just a tip of the iceberg of the work you're doing, but you are moving mountains and you're opening up doors for the rest of the country to be able to follow suit, and realizing that culinary medicine really does fit into our current medical system. So I thank you for all of you, from your humor to your wisdom to your willingness to share this time with us. And it's really, really, really been a pleasure, not just to sit here with you, but to know you for all these years. So thank you so much, Milette.
Thank you very much. It was my distinct pleasure to be a part of this conversation today.
I hope you feel motivated by this episode. Please leave us a rating and a review, and mention our show to others who you think could use this information. That could be your doctor. It could be somebody who works in the food service industry who's interested in the health components. It could be a friend that is working on their health journey. If you want to hear more, please remember to follow Culinary Medicine Recipe on your favorite podcast listening platform. Until next time, salud and bon appetit. All content provided or opinions expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please seek advice from your doctor or other qualified healthcare professional.